In many African spiritual traditions, the earth is not perceived as an inert surface upon which human life merely unfolds, but as a living presence that breathes, remembers, and responds. Land is understood as a conscious entity, infused with spiritual force, ancestral memory, and moral significance. Mountains are not simply geological formations. They are ancient witnesses. Rivers do not only carry water. They carry stories, warnings, and blessings passed down through generations. Soil itself is regarded as sacred, for it holds the remains of ancestors and the seeds of future life, binding the past, present, and unborn into a single continuum of existence. Within this worldview, space is never neutral. Every place carries a spiritual charge shaped by what has occurred there. Rituals performed, blood spilled, oaths sworn, or ancestors buried. A clearing where elders once gathered retains their wisdom. A path repeatedly walked during initiation, rites becomes a corridor between worlds. The land absorbs human action and, in turn, reflects it back through fortune or misfortune. To live upon the earth is therefore to live within a vast, unseen conversation between humans, ancestors, and spirits. African cosmologies often describe reality as layered rather than divided. The physical world, the ancestral realm, and the spiritual domain interpenetrate one another, and it is the land that serves as their meeting ground. Sacred spaces function as thresholds where communication becomes possible, where offerings are made, prayers are heard, and guidance is received. These spaces are not chosen at random. They are recognized through signs, inherited knowledge, and long observation of the land behavior. A place reveals itself as sacred when the earth speaks. Identity itself is inseparable from geography in this spiritual framework. One belongs not only to a family or a lineage, but to a particular land that carries the footprints of one's ancestors. To be disconnected from ancestral land is to lose more than property. It is to lose orientation within the spiritual universe. Land remembers names, sacrifices, and promises long after human voices fade, and it is this memory that gives place its authority. Thus, in African spiritual thought, the earth is both archive and oracle. It preserves history not in written form, but in sacred landscapes, ritual sites, and ancestral paths. Understanding the land is therefore an act of spiritual literacy, learning to read the visible world for invisible meaning. Before any map is drawn, before any boundary is marked, the land itself has already spoken. And those who listen begin to understand that every step taken upon the earth echoes far beyond the physical ground. In African spiritual traditions, geomancy is not merely a technique for predicting events or uncovering hidden truths about individual fate. It is, more fundamentally, a disciplined way of listening to the earth. The land is believed to communicate continuously, expressing approval, warning, or imbalance through its forms, movements, and disruptions. To practice geomancy is to learn the grammar of this communication, to interpret the subtle language through which the earth reveals its intentions and memories. Those entrusted with this knowledge, diviners, elders, and spiritual specialists, do not impose meaning upon the land. They observe it patiently. They read patterns where others see randomness and recognize messages where others see coincidence. A sudden crack in dry soil, an unusual animal path, the collapse of a termite mound, or the unexpected flow of water after ritual rainfall may all carry symbolic weight. These signs are never isolated. They are understood in relation to ancestral history, current moral conduct, and the spiritual condition of the community. Geomancy, in this context, rejects the idea that humans stand above nature as controllers or masters. Instead, it positions humans as participants within a living system that must be interpreted with humility. The earth is older, wiser, and more enduring than any single generation, and it remembers long cycles of harmony and disruption. When imbalance occurs, through broken taboos, neglected rituals, or social injustice. The land is believed to respond. Crops fail, paths become unsafe, or familiar spaces feel unsettled. These are not seen as random misfortunes, but as messages calling for reflection and correction. Natural formations hold particular geomantic significance because they function as amplifiers of spiritual energy. Crossroads are understood as points of convergence where forces meet and decisions carry heightened consequence. Hills and elevated ground are often associated with visibility into the spirit realm, while caves and deep earth spaces represent womb-like zones of transformation and ancestral presence. Rivers, constantly moving yet enduring, symbolize communication between worlds, carrying offerings downstream and returning spiritual influence upstream in unseen ways. Crucially, geomancy is not practiced for domination or exploitation. Its purpose is alignment. Through careful interpretation, communities seek to act in ways that restore balance between human behavior and the moral order of the land. Rituals are adjusted, boundaries respected, and transgressions acknowledged. In this way, geomancy functions as both a spiritual diagnostic tool and an ethical compass, guiding societies toward coexistence rather than conquest. To read the land, then, is to accept that meaning exists before human interpretation. The earth does not wait to be questioned. It speaks constantly. Geomancy teaches that wisdom lies not in forcing answers from the ground, but in cultivating the patience and reverence required to hear what has already been said. In African spiritual traditions, mapping does not begin with ink or parchment, nor does it rely on fixed coordinates or measured distances. Instead, spiritual cartography emerges from memory, ritual, and lived experience, charting an invisible landscape that exists alongside the physical world. This unseen map records not roads and borders, but flows of spiritual power, ancestral presence, and zones of moral consequence. It is a cartography carried in stories, songs, taboos, and ceremonial movement, passed from one generation to the next without ever being written down. Every community exists within such a spiritual map, whether consciously acknowledged or quietly obeyed. Villages are not placed arbitrarily upon the land. Their orientation reflects spiritual logic. The positioning of homes, meeting spaces, shrines, and burial grounds follows inherited knowledge about where ancestral energy gathers and where disruptive forces linger. Certain paths are walked only during rituals, while others are avoided entirely, not because of physical danger, but because they intersect with unseen currents that demand respect. To ignore these routes is to risk stepping outside the moral geography that sustains communal harmony. Direction itself carries meaning within spiritual cartography. East and west, uphill and downhill, river source and river mouth are understood as symbolic movements between life stages, spiritual states, and ancestral domains. A ritual performed facing a particular direction aligns the participant with forces believed to flow through that axis. Boundaries, too, are spiritually charged. The edge of a forest, the curve of a river, or the rise of a hill may mark the threshold between the human world and territories governed by spirits or ancestors. These borders are not walls, but agreements, understood limits that preserve balance between realms. Unlike modern maps, which seek to control space through measurement, spiritual cartography seeks relationship. It teaches where one may speak loudly and where silence is required, where offerings must be made, and where questions should not be asked. Knowledge of this map governs social behavior, shaping laws, taboos, and ritual obligations. A child learns early which spaces invite play and which demand reverence, absorbing spiritual geography as instinct rather than instruction. This cartography is also dynamic. As events unfold, wars, migrations, broken vows, or extraordinary signs, the spiritual map evolves. New sacred sites emerge where ancestors intervene, while others lose potency when rituals are neglected or memory fades. In this way, the land itself becomes a living manuscript, constantly rewritten by human action and spiritual response. To understand spiritual cartography is to accept that the most important maps cannot be seen. They are walked, remembered, and felt beneath the feet. Through them, communities orient themselves not only in space, but in meaning, ensuring that every movement across the land remains aligned with the unseen order that sustains life. Within African spiritual cartography, not all land is equal in power, and not all power is benevolent. Certain landscapes are believed to concentrate spiritual force so intensely that they demand strict rules of conduct. These are places where protection and danger exist side by side, where blessing can quickly turn into punishment if the moral order is violated. Sacred groves, ancestral burial grounds, ritual hills, and secluded riverbanks are approached with reverence, for they are understood as domains where the boundary between worlds grows thin. Such places are often protected by taboos rather than physical barriers. One does not enter casually, speak loudly, or take what does not belong. The land itself is believed to enforce these laws. Illness, disorientation, recurring misfortune, or unexplained conflict are interpreted as signs that a sacred boundary has been crossed. These consequences are not seen as acts of cruelty, but as corrective responses from a moral landscape that seeks balance rather than revenge. Forbidden spaces play an equally important role in this spiritual geography. Areas associated with unresolved deaths, broken rituals, or ancestral anger are deliberately avoided, not out of fear alone, but out of respect for forces that require healing before reentry. These landscapes carry memory in its most dangerous form, unsettled, unacknowledged, and powerful. To disturb them without proper ritual is to awaken echoes that ripple through families and entire communities. Stories circulate of land responding directly to human wrongdoing. Crops fail repeatedly on soil taken without consent. Paths twist and confuse travelers who ignore ancestral warnings. Water sources dry up when oaths made to the earth are broken. Whether understood symbolically or spiritually, these narratives reinforce a central belief. The land is an active moral agent. It observes human behavior and responds accordingly. Geomantic knowledge therefore functions as a protective system, guiding communities away from spiritual harm. Elders and diviners act as interpreters, diagnosing whether misfortune originates from social imbalance, ritual neglect, or violation of sacred space. Through offerings, cleansing ceremonies, and renewed respect for boundaries, harmony can be restored. Protection does not come from conquering the land, but from listening to it. In this worldview, danger is not arbitrary. It is the consequence of misalignment. Sacred landscapes remind humanity that power cannot be separated from responsibility. The earth grants shelter, fertility, and guidance, but it also demands remembrance, restraint, and humility. To walk safely upon such land is to move in awareness of forces that cannot be seen. You're always present, watching, remembering, and responding. In the modern world, where satellite imagery replaces ancestral memory and digital maps claim absolute authority over space, African sacred geography continues to exist, often quietly, sometimes invisibly, but never entirely erased. Beneath paved roads, towering buildings, and expanding cities, the old spiritual maps remain embedded in the land, carrying echoes of rituals, vows, and ancestral presence. Though their markers may no longer be recognized, their influence persists, shaping human experience in ways that modern logic struggles to explain. Development frequently clashes with this inherited wisdom. Roads cut through sacred groves. Construction disturbs ancestral burial grounds. And natural landmarks, once revered as spiritual anchors, are reduced to raw materials. In many communities, such disruptions are followed by unease, Projects fail without clear cause, accidents repeat, or social tension intensifies. For those who still understand the language of the land, these are not coincidences, but symptoms of spiritual disorientation, a sign that the moral geography has been ignored. Yet sacred geography has not disappeared, it has adapted. In urban spaces, shrines emerge quietly in courtyards and corners. Prayers are whispered where no one seems to listen. And rituals are performed in compressed forms, adjusted to survive within concrete landscapes. Memory becomes portable, carried in gestures, stories, and inherited prohibitions. The map is no longer openly visible, but it is still walked. At the same time, there is a growing return to ancestral knowledge. Environmental crises, cultural erosion, and spiritual exhaustion have prompted renewed interest in land-based wisdom. Sacred geography offers an alternative way of understanding the earth, not as a resource to be extracted, but as a living archive that records human action and demands accountability. It teaches that land cannot be endlessly violated without consequence, and that sustainability is as much spiritual as it is ecological. In this sense, geomancy and spiritual cartography speak directly to the modern condition. They remind humanity that progress without memory leads to imbalance, and that maps without meaning cannot guide the soul. The earth still remembers, even when humans forget. Every flood, drought, or unexplained fracture in the ground can be read as an echo, an ancient response reverberating through contemporary life. To listen again is not to reject modernity, but to deepen it. The survival of sacred geography suggests that the future may depend on relearning how to walk the land with awareness, humility, and respect. For beneath every step lies a story, and within every landscape, the earth continues to speak patiently, persistently, waiting for those who are willing to hear.